Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another awesome episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No One Ever. I'm your host, Chananya Abraham, and I had an awesome conversation today with Maryn, who is a doula and a birthing coach. I know we've had a few of these on before, but there's a certain approach that she brings to the table, a little bit refreshing, a little more on the spiritual side and getting in touch with the inner self. I think there is some amazing, amazing lessons that I was able to learn, and hopefully you'll be able to see as well, talking about where and how to give birth, what a parent and a mom needs to do to go inside to feel comfortable and competent about what they're about to experience, how to work with and work through their anxieties and fears that they may have. Such an awesome episode. Again, like always, please like and follow anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you have any follow-up questions that you would like to ask, or if you have any concerns, questions, or comments to us, please reach out to us on social media, which we have on our show notes. And you can email us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Enjoy the episode. Maryn, thank you so much for joining us. And this is something that we've worked really, really hard to get through. And I know we have on this podcast, we've talked a lot about birthing and mothering and like just the beginning process of becoming a parent. And I think there are certain things that we haven't touched on that I think, I wanted to reach out to you and that you and I can talk about. And I think the first place I want to start is, I guess you can see the overall, the mind-body connection when it comes to being a parent and nurturing that within our child itself at a very young age. And I'm curious, from your point of view, and why is this something that is so important from the holistic development of the relationship, but also for the development of a child? And how is that something that we can work on as new parents, or maybe if we haven't done it beforehand with our children, they may be a little bit older, maybe toddlers, or even older than that? How is that something that we can work on and creating that connection within the child and the parent?
Yeah, I love talking about the body and what we're feeling inside. Mm-hmm. And it sounds so simple, when you put it to people that way, that we have sensations happening all of the time inside of ourselves, good ones and bad ones and upsetting ones and ones we don't understand. And I think one of the first steps is just realizing within yourself as a parent, taking these baby steps. Our kids look to us, right? We model for them what the world is like and how to behave in it. And lucky for us, kids are really natural, even babies. I mean, they're also natural at listening to what they're feeling inside. That's how we come into the world. We come into this world as newborns, and touch and sensation is what makes up our world. That's how we know we're safe. That's how we know we're connected to specifically our mothers. So it's natural for children. And I think in adults, we kind of have to backpedal a lot of the time. Many of us were taught as children to ignore that. And I always love the example of, being in school. Most of us were in school or maybe church or something like that. And, told we had to ask to use the bathroom, for example. It's a great one.
Great example.
Or like little kids running around in school and being told they're being too loud. It's story time. They must sit down. They must be quiet. So, recognizing that our culture isn't really supportive of this mind-body connection. But as parents, again, we have to sort of start at the beginning. If it feels like we're new to that, if it feels like that's not something we ourselves are good at, and, almost look to our children, I think, for some examples, noticing,
and some guidance in a certain way.
Yeah, noticing for them, especially with a toddler, for example, screaming or running around or, something that feels like maybe it makes us uncomfortable, and saying to the child, like, where do you feel that? What are you feeling right now? And just kind of seeing what comes and learning from them and, just playing with it. I think it's also a lot of fun to realize we have bodies and, to figure out what's going on in there as an experiment.
Yeah, I the point that you're bringing up, which I know we've talked so much about on this podcast, I talk about it in my office as a psychotherapist all the time, is to ABC the moment. Just to always be curious. And I think the more we're curious and we look at it within ourselves, obviously the more we could express. And when we're trying already at a very young age to do that with our kids, it just reminded me, my wife was telling me literally, I think it was yesterday evening. Wow, it was like so a long time ago already. But yesterday evening, how our 3-year-old, as she was coming home from work, he like opens the door to the car. He's like, Mom, first I was sad, and then I was happy, and then I was mad. And he's like, and she's like, whoa, like, okay, someone's in touch with their feelings, and like you're just being like very, very here and now and expressive. And I maybe growing up in a home of a therapist really has something to do with that, and guilty as charged. But I think just being able to have that sense of, yes, there are emotions, there are things that are happening, and the more we give permission to the concept of emotions being something that is talked about, I think is something that is really important. You mentioned something that I'm just curious to hear more about, that I think is a really important topic. You talk about that connection between mother and child, and you're saying especially mother and child. What do you mean by that, and how is that something that we can be more aware of?
Well, as a midwife of many years, I believe and I have seen a million times, and I trust the bond of attachment between mother and baby. It doesn't mean, there isn't a bond of attachment, hopefully with the father as well with this baby, and with the three of them. Like, it's a very special triad all through conception, pregnancy, and birth. But because the mother, is necessary to the baby for survival, attachment is what sets us up for essentially, a healthy emotional and often physical life. So again, as a midwife, that's why I've always championed the natural birth process and physiological birth, because a birth process that isn't usually messed with can provide a stronger and more clear attachment in the moments after birth. So the moments after birth are crucial, if not the first hour, if not the first couple of days and weeks. There is like that super special, just open time where, again, the mom and baby are bonding on a level of smell and touch, like I said, and getting to know each other. And again, the baby needing to know at this instinctual level, right, that their mother is there, for them to survive, to not just eat and receive nourishment, but to be safe, right? Because babies don't have any other way of being safe in the world. They're so vulnerable. So the mother baby attachment, I realize, after years of being a midwife, is actually one of my prime motivations. And it's probably because I was born as a premature baby. So I was put in an incubator for many weeks. So I realize, that's one of my deep-seated issues in some ways, but also has allowed me to really, really want that for my own children. And then, in serving lots of families, just kind of holding the space for that to happen. And even when births are beautiful and happen just easily and quickly at home, not messing with things. There's so many ways we can kind of get in the way as midwives, but just letting the mom and baby bond and not interrupting them and not holding a baby, not taking the baby away or even to the other side of the room to be weighed or measured. No one needs to do any of that in a healthy situation. And the bonding and the attachment is the prime objective. So important.
So, okay, what you're saying is, in general, you said the one of the best ways, or maybe the best way to have at starting that relationship. Obviously, it's been happening for months already inside mom, and it's something that is already, the bond is already there in a certain way, and then you want to be able to continue that process through the birthing process itself, which can be traumatic for all parties involved, and then also into something that is right afterwards within minutes. And you're saying one of the best ways is for the child to continue that connection at the same time as much as possible. So what are some of the ways that can do that? And you mentioned home births, or for those people listening that are not doing that at home and they might be doing that in a hospital, how can we make sure that connection and that attachment is something that is of primal importance? And yet specifically, you're talking about also, like, I'm thinking about, my kids when they were born, having being measured, all of them being born in a hospital. How can we try to make sure that the attachment is something that is staying as close as possible in all those different situations?
Oh, I love this question. Yeah, it's so, so important. I think first is just reiterating what I shared, which is the birth process isn't separate from the bonding and breastfeeding process. Even as mammals, that's true. So the birth isn't more important than the bonding and breastfeeding, et cetera, right? So those three things are kind of like a triangle of equal importance. And as mammals, we try to preserve all of them for the best health of this baby, emotional and physical health. So, one of the easiest ways to understand is considering the birth process as a hormonal dance between the mom and baby. And, it doesn't matter where the birth happens. I've seen this information help people no matter what they choose. But understanding that as mammals, our bodies do work in a certain way. So, Dr. Sarah Buckley is a really awesome woman and author. She has a book called Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering. And that book has changed so many lives. And I remember when I read it, just feeling so validated that there's actually science to support what I'm saying. There's actually science to say how the hormones of birth work, oxytocin, and even adrenaline is part of the birth process. So if we understand even on a basic level how the body is getting a baby out, then we can take steps to preserve that. And often to preserve that, we are actually stepping back a little bit, which, can be the opposite of the medical model. So people that are choosing that can maybe be more prepared with what they want, right? So for example, having lots of lights on in the room, the birth room, is common practice. Maybe having a lot of people come in and observe, right? There's a lot of students sometimes at births. So maybe for that family, if they understand this and they want this kind of birth where it just sort of flows as the body is able to do it naturally, say to their doctor, like, hey, I'd like the room to be this way. Can I request that nobody come in to observe me that I don't know? Because as mammals, when we have people observe us birthing, it's really disruptive, right? It's like having sex and having people watch. Like it's on that same really intimate level.
Yeah.
So, I won't rehash her book. It's a really wonderful book. And I found that partners in particular really love it because they learn too how to maybe be with their birthing partners better. They understand, that limiting words and limiting, making, giving this woman choices in a sense, in a linear way isn't always helpful because as a birthing woman, we're in our mammal brain. So if someone says to a birthing woman, by 2:00, this is going to happen. She can't comprehend that. She's not in that like thinking part of her brain. So, it's great on both sides of the equation to be able to be with someone that's birthing and understand it better. And then, of course, as the birthing woman, it might help you make some other choices that would help facilitate this natural process. So that's all to say that if we are birthing closer to how mammals do it, so, cats, dogs, cows, they all have a similar way of birthing and they have certain needs. If we're able to respect more of those, then again, the birth process usually flows out more organically and with less intervention. We see that babies are more willing and able to make these attachments. So excess drugs in the system of the mom, for example, sometimes that's necessary, but often those things are done routinely. So that, for example, can really disrupt the awareness, right, with which this baby comes into the world and is able to bond. Classic example, like you said, is, as soon as the baby's out, there's cord cutting, there's taking the baby away. Whereas we want to preserve that, for as many minutes and as many hours. And so again, these are requests and things that people can make for their own birth process if that's what they want and they want to.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. That there's a certain autonomy that birthing mothers can have within the whole process, and they can ask and request for certain things. At the same time, I think something that a lot of people experience is a tremendous amount of internal pain, and therefore they're given medications or drugs to sort of assist with that.
Yes.
I'm curious, and that's the situations where someone was trying not to have certain things put into their body, but yet also wanting to alleviate some of that pain that is there. How can they go about making sure that their needs are getting taken care of without the need for that intervention of medications?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and no judgment on anybody making that choice.
Right.
However, I would say that we are set up as mammals to handle that. So if we decide we don't want to or we're not able to, that happens as well. But I will say that a lot of what we perceive as unusual or what I would say kind of is like excess pain of the birth process comes from some of the interventions. So back to my example of being observed in that room by students, or, having a cold room, or being scared. Being scared is enough to elevate the pain to a level that does feel like we can't handle it. So I've always said, actually, I did have my first baby in the hospital, so I have experienced that. And it was quite painful, even though I did not choose pain relief. But I understand. I remember my body and how it felt, and how scared I was, and how that really affected what I was feeling, and it affected the pain. And I wouldn't say, my home births were completely painless, although I would say that's true about a few of them. But it was different because I was able to manage the pain in a way that felt better to me. So for me, that was being able to move around in the ways that I wanted. If I was home, I could go in my bathroom and shut the door. So I think there are outside ways, in a sense, of being able to be with the sensations that in some cases a hospital setting doesn't really facilitate. So I get it. I get how if you're in that situation and there's a lot going on, it can feel completely overwhelming to the system.
Okay. So I think you did a phenomenal job of the validation for what they might be going through. Now, what would you recommend for how to deal with the pain in a way where it's not just something that we can handle, but it's something, or a woman that might be scared of going into a situation without having said drugs? How would you go about talking to them, or what would you say, or what can they do in those type of situations?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with hundreds of women who are choosing home birth, for example, but are scared of the pain. They haven't had a baby before, and they're intimidated because our culture is so brutal. We're set up to believe birth is meant to be painful and women are miserable. And again, I'm sure that's true for some people, but it doesn't have to be that way. It definitely does not have to be that way. Birth is a natural event in most cases. And even though it's intense, there's nothing wrong. So all I can say is, if you haven't experienced it, that there is a pain that comes when something is wrong in your body, and, it sets off alarm bells and you want that to go away. And there's a way of changing your thinking around the pain of birth that allows you to actually open and accept it. And that takes work. That's not something you do in a day. That's not something you do while you're in labor. This is a process in pregnancy of retraining your brain.
Before, right.
Yeah. So, I have a podcast called Taking Back Birth, and one of my most listened episodes is something along the lines of rewiring your brain, with the pain of birth or something like that. You could Google it. But that was after my 9th birth, which, it took me 9 babies in a sense to figure it out. And I don't even want to take credit for it. I think the baby has a lot to do with what we experience in labor. I think this baby, my 9th baby, was very available and open to me experiencing it this way. But it was not painful. And the whole pregnancy, I just really sat with these ideas of intensity and pressure. And, what if I accepted that? What if I went into that so much? What if I could feel it so much that it didn't scare me anymore? What would happen if I completely opened myself up to that? And so I found for me that in that there was a limit to the pain. It didn't go beyond what I could handle when I really allowed it. It actually almost felt pleasurable. I think that's a strong word, but in accepting it, our body opens and kind of creates oxytocin, and our brain says, hey, this isn't that bad. It's intense, but it's not going to kill me.
It also sounds like you need to be in a place where you're embracing it. And the mindset, like you said, doesn't happen overnight. It's not happening when you're starting to feel contractions. It's starting months before that.
Yeah.
So someone comes to you, and then we're going to get back to the point of having 9 pregnancies and the influence that's had on you with everything. But someone's coming to you, and they're receptive, they're open, but yet they don't know much, or maybe they're even skeptical. I'm curious, how do you sort of talk to them regarding what the process is, and letting them know what their choices are, and how they can make this something that can be embraced internally without any hospital or without any other medications? How do you talk to them, and how do you invite the conversation to start?
You have to start where someone is. There are beliefs that people hold about birth deeply that are not compatible sometimes with what they want. So, people can say, oh, I want a birth, I want a natural birth, I want whatever. But what are their real beliefs that are held in their body, right? So that takes time to sometimes unearth. I love to hear about someone's own birth. So I really encourage women and even partners to figure out how they were born, to talk to their mothers if that's possible, and to get a sense of what that experience was like. Because the way our mothers birth greatly influences how we birth. And again, the belief systems that are connected. So, if our mother experienced birth as extremely traumatic and painful, it's not a done deal. It doesn't mean we have to experience it that way, but we have to realize that the body does hold that memory, and ignoring it sometimes is
score.
Yeah, the body keeps the score. So not only, do we have the cellular memory of our maternal lineage in there, right? So we might have a program, and it might be really positive. It might be babies come out, birth is natural, and it might be babies don't come out without help, birth is scary. Which is it? And can you find that in your body? Again, talk to your mother. What was she feeling? What was she experiencing? And, even as the baby, most people don't remember, but kind of tuning in to like, what did that baby experience? What was birth like for that baby? Was it scary? Did it feel rushed? Did it feel like you were booted before your time, right? There's a lot of that with inductions. So just kind of getting more familiar with some of these concepts, and again, taking the time to let them unravel rather than just, being in this place where you're like, my mantra is birth is beautiful. Like, I'm just going to believe that no matter what. When push comes to shove in the birth process, the body is going to reveal itself. And, it doesn't mean there is this perfect end goal in a sense. I think the work of pregnancy is to unearth what we're meant to unearth so that we can mother this baby. I don't think the goal is always like, oh, I'm going to have this perfect birth as a result. To me as a midwife, that's actually not the goal. I don't know what birth will bring for this woman. I haven't known what it would bring for myself. So I also don't want to hang that as this like false standard. It's doing the work of pregnancy, tuning into what's needed and following that, because occasionally our babies or our bodies do need something that maybe we don't really want, right?
No.
Right? If something might come up. Not every pregnancy and birth happens in this way that is absolutely ideal. So I think just doing the inner work can bring up a lot and lead someone to the path that is meant for them. And I hope that, my hope for women overall is that can be embraced, right? Our power as women is super special, especially in birth. And our power sometimes comes through in different ways. My last baby, my 10th baby, was surprisingly born at the hospital. There was something that was just off and felt wrong in his labor at home. And so I transported myself in as a midwife, and he was born almost immediately on the table. No one touched me. No one even looked at me. I don't think they even put me in the computer at the hospital, but it was so humbling. It was so humbling because I do believe in the power of all of these things. But at the end of the day, birth is also a mystery. And so women are powerful just for doing it. And we feel even better about it when we're supported. And some of these things have probably been sorted along the way, our emotional history, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot has changed over the years when it comes to mothers giving birth. I love that last one you were saying regarding support. And I'm curious if you could talk about that a little bit regarding what support is out there, both, I guess you could say externally, maybe internally, regarding the family or their inner circles regarding their partners or other family members, and how can they go about creating a support system that works for them in a very healthy but also autonomous way.
Yeah, I love that. I think along the lines of autonomy first is realizing, and this is maybe a harsh truth, but realizing as the pregnant and birthing woman that no one can do this for you. I think that's something to sit with first. That is actually true. I don't care who you are, where you are, like, this is your baby. it's going to play out in the way it needs to. And it's your, it's your responsibility. Nobody can have a baby for you. So, just recognizing that and sitting with the feelings that might come with that. And an exercise I love to offer pregnant women is to make a flower. So, you're kind of the center, you're the center of the flower, and imagining as many petals around the flower as you come up with. But those flower petals are support. So like you said, one is my partner, my community, my spiritual or religious community, whatever, nature, food is a great support. Whatever, my chiropractor,
it can be a great
right?
support, and it could also be a hindrance if not done correctly. So
yes, totally. But unique for that woman to kind of brainstorm and just take a little bit of time and make it fun. Like, what feels supportive to me? And during this pregnancy, which is not like my last pregnancy or my future pregnancy, during this pregnancy, who do I want around? What would feel good and supportive? And being honest about that. And then, obviously looking at what you've created and figuring out how to utilize that. And again, recognizing that I think the ultimate authority does come from inside ourselves. So when we're looking at the petals of that flower, it's external support usually. I mean, not always. There can be some internal connection there. But just recognizing that, that we do have things on the outside that can support. And those are really valuable. So at the same time that no one can birth for us, a woman without any support usually feels just really, really alone, as you would expect. Right. And I don't wish that for women. I think there is also that trend. I'm not sure if your listeners are necessarily aware of just this trend towards free birth, this trend towards essentially, doing it alone. And I have a lot always to say about that. Not that it's not a valid choice. Every choice a woman could make or would make is valid for sure. But there's something about that movement that is really isolated. It's really trauma-based. And it often results from, again, maybe past birth experiences that were really awful or difficult. And, this woman has now she doesn't want anything. She doesn't trust anyone. She doesn't want anything from anyone. And, there is an independence there that I'm sure can be admired. But at the end of the day, birth was a social event. I think we forget that birth didn't necessarily invite in the whole community at the moment of, but birth was a social event. Women were together. The village midwife would probably come and she'd bring her daughter. And, the woman that was birthing would have her children around, and maybe the men would be together, in another room or in another place. But it wasn't something that was ever done alone. And, even in the mammal kingdom, we see that mammals are the same way. That elephants, for example, they love to watch other elephants have babies and be together. And, again, it's that social connection, kind of how we started the conversation.
For sure. I want to go back to something you were saying before regarding, you said 10 births total.
Yes.
And I'm curious for you, what was your journey like from that first one, which you said was born in the hospital, and how your philosophy has changed regarding birth and the impact overall that all your experiences have had on the work that you do?
Oh, geez. I was lucky enough to start even with my first birth, even though it wasn't a hospital. My mother had always told me that birth was possible. So, when I was born, I said I was a preemie, so there was this traumatic element. But my mother always said, not that birth was fun, but that it was doable. She was proud of herself, right? So there was something growing up hearing that I wasn't scared. I wasn't scared of birth. I knew that if she could do it, that I could do it. And I feel like that's just something that's carried me through. Not that I haven't had things come up in my births, but ultimately I know my body can do what it needs to do. And as a midwife, it's not been the easiest in a sense mentally. Like sometimes I wish I could have just been a birthing woman for many of those, and, not in my head at all, because you can't erase what you know, right? You can't erase the training that you have. But, that's how my kids chose to come into the world with that that element of my life. So each birth has been just a journey. You know, there's been similarities between them, but each has been its own experience and taught me vastly different things. And, you know, the thing I love about birth, and I've loved it for myself and for other women, is that birth completely changes you. It doesn't matter if you've had 10 babies or not, you know, it's that first baby, it's the second, it's the third. You are a completely different person. And figuring that out has always excited me rather than scared me. Kind of like, who am I now? What did this mean to me? And, you know, I've seen it in my husband, and it affects the rest of the family as well. So every time a baby comes in, a mother is changed, a family is changed. And I've always embraced that, kind of like, what's next? You know, what's next for us? What's next for me? What did this baby come to teach us? And I think approaching it that way, you know, has made it exciting. And at times when it was hard or long or any of the things that it can also be, just really appreciating the transformation that it is.
Yeah. And it sounds like for you, there's been so much internal appreciation that you've had to the process, to mothering aspect of things. And when it comes to doing this as a profession as well, I'm sure you meet a lot of first-time mothers or mothers that have had anxieties from past experiences or maybe from traumas in a certain way from their experiences. And maybe there are even some like cultural norms and expectations that might be regarding the birthing process and having children. I'm curious, how have you used your own personal experience to work with and to talk to people that have had horrendous or traumatic experiences in the past, or maybe have their own fears that are not based on anything? And how do you bring that into the experience that you would like to give over to mothers for that, what they might have?
I think one of the main things my own births has taught me is, as I shared, a humility for the process. So even though I believe in natural birth and, you know, I believe in home birth, I'm not one to say that it's right for everybody. I think the more important part, again, is that women are encouraged to find their power. And so sometimes I think my only job as a midwife really is to hold the space for them to safely sort of find themselves, you know? And I feel that I'm really good at that without judgment, because I honestly don't care. I don't need anyone to have a certain kind of birth for me. It doesn't matter.
You're not doing the birth
me.
for you. So
no, it doesn't matter. What matters to me is that she grows into this strong, confident mother that I know every woman is capable of. I believe that changes the world. Women that know how to mother their children, right? It changes the kind of children that are in the world. So that's the ultimate goal of birth. It's not really the birth itself, even though we've talked about so many important things. It's how the woman feels in it, and how she feels she was respected, and how she feels she was able to use her own voice. All of those things affect how she mothers. So I welcome all of it. You know, if someone has it all together as a newly pregnant woman, good for her. But most women don't. There's a ton of fears. There's a ton of questions. There's a ton of what ifs. And I think, again, it's holding space for her to find those answers within herself. And also be a realist. You know, I think I'm pretty real. Like, birth is awesome and beautiful. And we were meant to be, you know, we were meant to be born. Look at all of us here on this planet, right? Birth must work. At the same time, you know, we are humans and we have a lot going on. We have this mental, emotional, psychosocial stuff. And it can be complicated. It's not always blissful and easy. So I think something, you know, about our work at Indie Birth even, that's hard for us to articulate is that, you know, there's so often this black and white mentality in the birth world and in the world in general, right? It's like either this or it's that. And I feel like we're always kind of walking this middle line of like, it's actually whatever it is for you. And you know,
the key point. Yeah.
Yeah.
A very, very good point.
Yeah. It's not one or the other. And in my own births, yeah, I've experienced like a lot of variation. So there's just, you know, the humility again, to kind of bring it back to that birth is a mystery. This is, I think, part of the divine plan. It is, you know, it is how we get here on this planet. but we don't control it. So we kind of constantly have to be balancing like what we want, and then also the surrender to like we don't control it.
Right. I think it's such a healthy mindset. And obviously it shows, I think, the work and the process that you've been through over the years and being able to go ahead and get there. Now, you can also have situations where, let's say a woman is not in a position to make choices for herself. And let's say it's regarding the pregnancy itself. And while she may have wanted to abort the child, whether it's religious purposes or the states that she lived in, doesn't allow them to do that. And now they are in a position where they're going to be doing this because of the position that they're in. And I'm curious, how would you talk to that woman regarding what she's about to go through for the next couple of months, and how she can try to embrace this as much as possible, even though this is not something that she wanted to do?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is the opportunity to embrace, and again, also the honest truth of where someone is at. And, that can happen with a woman with a pregnancy that she really wanted, to be honest. Sometimes feelings come up in pregnancy that we really don't expect, or maybe our life circumstance changes and, it suddenly becomes this like big, scary thing we're in. And I think it's just a lot like life, it's one day at a time often with these kind of situations. It's finding the little places of light, the little things that feel good, the little things that we're enjoying, rather than focusing on what's not working. I think that's something as humans we're really good at, right? Is our negative bias on life often. So maybe just encouraging that woman to find what is working, what's feeling good, keeping it maybe sometimes to basics. So, how does this work? What does a growing baby need? And that women can still be a vessel for life, even if that's not something they plan to ultimately hold on to. Everybody's going to make the choice that feels right for them. I believe in karma. I believe there's reasons why things are presented in our lives, and it's not a judgment. And it's certainly not a judgment that we can make as humans. I think that's left up to, a higher power and where someone is coming from. So I would not judge that, just doing the best to help that woman kind of make the best of it and find the places that are working and prepare her in the same way, right? Like if she's choosing to keep the pregnancy, the baby still has to be born. All of the things that we're talking about still apply. And she has the opportunity again to, give that baby life and maybe release it to another family where, it was maybe ultimately meant to be. So it's definitely
and that's why
complicated.
She's going through this. Your answer is resonating with me. And at the same time, I also believe that sometimes the things that got them to be in the place where they are resistant to be doing this is the religion and is their higher power. And yet they're still going through this. So how would you talk to someone about, going through something that like you believe is absolutely amazing, and it could be so uplifting regarding your own self-growth, but at the same time they may feel very, very bitter about this process, and being there with them? How would you talk to them?
I think again it's just acknowledging that conflict, or maybe it's more than a conflict. It's like, absolutely, this is not where I want to be. And again, there's honesty in that. And if we're gonna even take it back to the body, there's places I'm sure where that lives for somebody. So the goal isn't to make that go away. That's a valid feeling. You don't want to do this. This is not what you want for your life. Is there a way to find that in the body? Can we touch into that feeling? You don't have to stay there, but can we touch into that in the body? What does that feel like for you? What does it look like for you? What does that bring up? What does that remind you of? And, then kind of taking them to a place in the body that feels okay. It doesn't have to feel great. You don't have to be happy. There doesn't have to be pleasure in this, but just a place in the body that's okay. And, so that's like a somatic experiencing technique, something that I'm learning and really, really into. And that's a way to start to balance the nervous system, in the face of trauma or after a trauma. The goal isn't to avoid it. The goal isn't to make it go away. But it's to practice, how can we help the nervous system? And I think for someone like that, to me, that would be one of the tools that I would use. We're not going to talk our way out of this. You're not going to think your way out of this. how can we help your body just find some more peace in some moments, so that you can deal with what you're in? Because life is not pleasant or fun. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations that absolutely make us want to crawl out of our own skin. We don't want to be in the body we're in. And I've been there in different ways. So I totally can appreciate that. And, it's just not easy. So I think support, again, is great. Having people around that you don't feel are judging you, or just can just be quiet, right? Like, just be quiet and be with me in this.
Yeah, I think that validation, I think, is key in any situation, no matter how skeptical or hurt or mad or angry you may be, and maybe even nervous as well. I think, the concept of that validation is probably the most important thing. And I think, being able to have a certain gratitude for the small stuff, even in those bitter situations, I think is one of the ways that we can sort of plant a seed for a healthy experience as much as possible, no matter how bitter the situation may be.
Exactly.
That being said, I know there are so many things and so many different places we can go from here, but I also want to be mindful of your time. So I'm curious, in the way our conversation went today, are there certain things that maybe we didn't bring up, we didn't talk about, that might be important for someone that might be going through this birthing experience for the first time, or something that you might talk about normally that we didn't talk about?
We've talked about so many things. Yeah, I don't know that there's anything completely outside of what we've talked about. Again, I think it comes down to some self-investigation and figuring out what you believe or how you want to shift that, So there isn't a wrong belief system. I think, again, birth has this black or white mentality sometimes on the outside. And, that can feel somewhat true. Sometimes, people think birth is scary. It is something to be managed. There's nothing wrong with that belief system. However, if that's not what you want to experience, then you either have to shift something, right? Or something has to give. So I always say, you can't go to an Italian restaurant and ask for Chinese food. And I see that a lot in the birthing world, right? It's a woman's like, oh, but I don't want this. Yeah, I don't want this. I don't want that. I don't want this. And it's like, okay, well then let's talk about what you do want. And let's eventually move into where that might be the most possible. For me, that was with my second birth. It was my first home birth, but I was still, this is so weird, I was still planning a hospital birth because I just hadn't gotten the memo yet that wasn't going to work for me. So I sat there with my doula a couple weeks before my son was born, and I just cried. And I was like, here's my birth plan for the hospital. I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. It was 10 pages long or something ridiculous. And my doula said to me, well, then maybe this isn't the right place for you. Again, the Chinese food, Italian food, mentality. So, there's nothing wrong with what you believe, but you have to just kind of really be honest about that, I think.
Right.
And with your partner, kind of come together on how you want to feel in this experience. How do you want to start your parenting journey? Because obviously that's what pregnancy and birth are. And know that your options are way more than you think. I think that's, even in this country with all the resources we have, most people are still choosing hospital birth. And I don't think it's because it's right for all of them. I think it's because that's what we've been taught. That's what we've been indoctrinated in. So if you hear anything here or elsewhere that kind of resonates with you or makes a little light go on, just to take your time investigating it, and figure out what feels right for you. There's so much information out there. So that's not a problem. It's really just kind of weighing the information as it applies to you and coming back to yourself if that's possible, So coming back to what you're feeling, the connection with the baby inside of you is a whole other thing, but that can be really useful in helping to navigate the choices because there are so many of them.
Yeah, though there are tons of choices, and I think having a healthy support system around you is of utmost importance. And I think there is no right way to do this. This is the way that works for you, which I think is what I'm taking out of this conversation, which I'm so glad that I'm able to say out loud in this way, just because I think it's my wife and I having experienced 5 births ourselves, where I've been supportive for her 5 births. I haven't done anything. I think that, that's something that, that there is so many different ways, the way things can happen, and to embrace it and to just be mindful of the process. And, if it's something that could be enjoyed, see what you could enjoy about it. And if there are things that need to be prepared, prepare as much as you can. And, I think there's so many amazing things that happen for this magical first part of becoming a parent, that, do the best you can with it and realize that, let's embrace the situation as much as you can. And I think it's such a beautiful, great message. And I'm so happy that you've been able to share this. As we sort of finish up, I'd like to be asking some rapid fire questions as we sort of close up over here. But I can't thank you enough and really appreciate this amazing guidance and insight you have for this amazing time in a parent's life. So really appreciate it. As we finish up over here, I'm curious to hear from you. If you would think of a babysitter that you'd be comfortable with from history for your children, who would that person be and why?
Oh, geez. I have no idea. Maybe the village midwife. She would have been a great babysitter. She had see so much. We say midwives used to serve womb to tomb. So what an amazing being, what an amazing body of knowledge they had back in the day. So I'd pick her. She'd be a great babysitter.
That's a great answer. We never had the one before. I know you mentioned one book over here, but I'm curious if there's either like a podcast besides for your own, or a YouTube video, or TED Talk, or maybe some author that people can get more information regarding the birthing process. Where can they look?
Yeah, like I said, Sarah Buckley's Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering. I have a book. It's called Indie Birth, A Story of Radical Birth Love. And there's a lot of birth stories in there and lots of birth politics for people that are trying to figure that all out. And I don't know. Honestly, I can't really think of any other.
Well, I think those are two very good resources. So I appreciate that. And we will for sure be posting show notes over here. My last question for you is, if you can think of an everyday mundane superpower you would like to have as a mom, what would that be?
I think it's just presence. I think that's really, I don't know how mundane that is, but being like a child, being in the moment, I think is something I would like to have more of. I think that takes care of a lot and allows us to appreciate life.
100%. I think it says a lot about you as a mom and about what you do as well. So great answer. As we sort of finish up over here, where can people find more about you? And how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, we've got a lot of links, which I can send you, but it's indiebirth.org is the main site. We have indiebirthmidwiferyschool.org, where people can learn about becoming a midwife. sacredsisterhooddoula.org, which is where we train doulas. My podcast is Taking Back Birth, and that's, on all the apps. And we're on Instagram as Indie Birth. Lastly, we have a new show on Rumble called Midwives Gone Wild, which is just a really honest talk show kind of between Margot and I, who's my co-founder of Indie Birth. So that's our newest project out there.
Amazing. Well, I will for surely be posting any show notes over here, and I really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.